Welcome back to Child Mental Health for Pediatric Clinicians. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Fallucco, child psychiatrist and mom. Today is the start of a new series on the pod called Bench to Bedside, where we discuss the latest science in child mental health that has the potential to change your practice. And for this, we have on our podcast the senior author of the groundbreaking study recently published in the journal Cell that has overturned our understanding of how stimulants work in the brain. Without giving too much away, in our discussion, we're going to talk about how he and his team found out that ADHD stimulants do not impact the brain's attention networks. He's going to tell us how stimulants actually work in the brain. And we're going to talk about other things like how ADHD is a misnomer and some of the strengths of children and adults with ADHD. We're going to talk about video games and TikTok and hacking into a variable reward schedule, and even about the biological basis of procrastination. But first, a little bit about our guest. Dr. Nico Dosenbach is the David M. and Tracy S. Holtzman Professor of Neurology at Washington University in St. Louis. He is a pediatric neurologist, and he also holds faculty appointments in the departments of pediatric radiology, psychological and brain sciences, and biomedical engineering. So please join me in welcoming to the pod Dr. Nico Dosenbach.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So let's get into it. I'm excited to talk about your study, but I want to start with a little bit of background. For years, we've been telling our patients with ADHD that stimulant meds improve your ability to pay attention, to concentrate and focus. Prior to conducting this recent study on the effects of stimulants on the brain, what has we really known in the field about how stimulants work and where they work in the brain?
That's a good question. I think the sort of the story in both the research literature and I think what I learned in residency or what I would tell my patients was exactly what you said, that these drugs help in ADHD because they improve your ability to pay attention. Research is difficult, and the kind of research that was probably backing this the most, which is human functional MRI or fMRI research, still growing up and getting better every year. The very earliest studies weren't of the highest quality, but we've been doing this for a long time, the functional MRI research. And I would say in the last 5 years or so, the methods have gotten better again. And we have access to better and more data. Like we're looking at the brain, but now we have a better microscope. So it's really easy to see more detail.
To recap some of the things you said, academically, what we've been taught or what was like the academic dogma is that stimulants work by improving your attention. And so presumably by having some sort of effect on the attention networks of the brain. And so what your study did, I love the analogy you used. You said it's like our study used a better microscope, looking at functional MRI in a very large sample of nearly 6,000 children, some of whom were taking stimulants, to really ask the question and determine the answer. What is it that stimulants are doing in the brain? And can you share with us the major findings from your study?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we were looking for, what we thought we would find was changes in the brain's attention networks, and that there would be changes in those networks related to taking a stimulant. And we had two data sets. We had a large population sample of children called the ABCD, Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study. And then we also had a clinical trial that was a small sample size clinical trial of adults taking stimulant and scanning them prior on the medication and then afterwards off, which is a totally different approach. And the results were significant. They showed the same result from both approaches. And the result was that there's absolutely no change in the brain's attention networks. Actually, if you take all the brain regions and rank order them by how much are they affected by stimulants, the main attention network came in dead last.
Even the title of your article called out this very unexpected finding. The title of the article is Stimulant Medications Affect Arousal and Reward, Not Attention Networks. And that is somewhat earth-shattering in our field because literally we call these attention deficit hyperactivity disorder meds. And your study in your group is saying there's actually no effect, no significant effect in the attention networks in the brain among people who are taking stimulants.
It's actually a funny story. Once the paper came out, a lot of patients on stimulant medications, they were all saying, whoever thought that ADHD meds improve your attention. That's not what it feels like to me. Don't discount the patients. Like they know. It's almost like 99% of patient responses had read the article, the abstract were just like, yeah, duh. Like, why is this a cell paper?
Patients themselves have a different lived experience, as you're describing. They take stimulants, they understand how the stimulants work, and they experience it not even as much as if this is improving my attention, but in a different way.
Yeah, that's right.
So we know that stimulants ultimately have positive effects on performance in children and adults with ADHD. So now here is where you tell us more about exactly where in the brain did you find that stimulants were working?
There were very strong reproducible effects, and they were related to what I would call an arousal signature. So there's essentially a signature of being less drowsy or wide awake, which of course fits with stimulants. The results meant that instead of making you better at attention, it looks like you're wide awake, which half of kids in America are sleep deprived. That's in that data set too. And if you're sleep deprived, taking a stimulant will partially offset that. And so you'll have better performance and you'll feel better.
So one of the findings that your study team had is that the big difference that the stimulants are making in the brain is in the networks and brain regions associated with arousal, with being awake and alert.
Yes. Yes. And then the other signature was related to dopaminergic reward or sort of prediction error learning systems, but essentially motivational systems, right? And the imagery I like is it makes you more tolerant of drudgery, of things you don't like doing, because the perceived predicted reward is higher. The wild card here is that what one person considers drudgery is another person's hobby and vice versa. And so there can be some idiosyncrasies. But essentially, if you don't want to do it, which for a lot of kids would maybe be math homework, it can essentially pre-reward you, raise your floor on the dopamine, because you need dopamine to do anything, right? If you don't have enough predicted reward from an activity, you're just not going to do it, especially as a kid.
So I want to stop you there. So you talked about the two ways that stimulants act in the brain. And the first is in the arousal system, making you feel wide awake. And you also highlighted that there's such a big problem with sleep deprivation, and that the stimulants, as you found in the study, can essentially reverse that.
Yeah, the stimulants seem to reverse the brain signature of drowsiness and the cognitive deficits, which I'm not sure you should call a deficit because it's temporary. It's everybody knows, especially any physician. If you haven't slept, you're not at your best. What's interesting there is it's completely unknown whether or not that's a true effect, in the sense that it can truly biologically recover the physiological essence of having slept, or if it just papers over it and there's a price to pay later, either like that evening or maybe like years down the road.
This gets to the second area of the brain that stimulants are working in, according to your study. The stimulants are acting on the motivational systems, or the drive, as you put it, and like basically able to override this sense of this is boring and I don't want to do it. And it pre-rewards people, kind of raises the floor on dopamine and increases their drive and motivation to complete a task that previously would have been really boring. And that in turn may be the mechanism for better performance at school, better performance at cognitive tests, because you don't get bored or annoyed and drop out or decide to do something more exciting. And that's why this issue of reward and motivation is so key, because we know with ADHD that when you do have a lot of motivation and you're just inherently interested in it, that you can lock in and focus. And the issue is it's harder to pay attention with things that you consider to be boring or drudgery. And unfortunately, sometimes those things may occur during school hours or in certain classes. And that makes it really hard for kids to be as successful in school and to just enjoy school.
But it fits with a lot of other behavioral data in humans, even in macaques, for example, that stimulants don't make you smarter, which of course would be like, how would that even work, right? It's just that when you don't want to do something or you're tired of both, you're not going to do very well at it. And if you're now wide awake and you're going to persist longer because it feels less boring, you're going to have better performance, but you're no smarter. And finishing this paper, I tried my own version of this. I made a mistake. I bought this house that has a giant yard with all these trees. So now I'm like a tree farmer. And in the fall, It's just covered in leaves. And I'm old and I'm there with my rake and I got three kids. The youngest is too young, but the older two are 10 and 13. They could rake. So I
Yeah.
tried and I said, hey, help your old man rake these leaves before I have a back spasm. And they both look at me and they go,
No, this is boring. Why would
yeah.
I do that, Dad?
And they're physically active. They're like running around. But they don't want to rake. So I said, okay, I'll pay you, which already I figured about, but I really didn't want to get a back spasm and go to the ER. So, and they're like, no. And then I raked a pile, not a very big one, and the youngest one just jumped in it. And then you can see the older two, they look at me and I'm like, you can't jump in that. You're going to hurt yourself. Like, you're much bigger. And then my daughter goes, what if we rake a really big pile? Would it be safe to jump in it if it's enormous? If we take all the leaves in the yard and make one giant pile, you get to jump in it. Then they both ran in the garage, got the extra rakes, and started raking. And I felt like a trickster because I was like, oh my God, now they're raking, right? But it's like the same activity. But now they've changed how they think about it, and the predicted reward is no longer my dad won't yell at me for being lazy. It's like I get to do this fun thing, jump into a giant pile of leaves, and it worked. And they
Yes.
raked for a long time, and then they start jumping into leaves. And I was like, this is hilarious because it's the same thing, but it depends on how you see it.
Exactly. Which brings us to this question of what are the clinical implications of these findings? How does this change how we approach either treatment for ADHD and or how we talk to families about how stimulants work?
Great question. I would say one thing I think we got grilled on a lot was there's definitely some folks who are anti-stimulant medications. You could probably explain to me why exactly, because sometimes I'm like, why even? And so they would be fishing for like, okay, so you found a different explanation for how they work, so they don't work. And I'm like, no, that's not what that means. They work. Like there's clear evidence in the data that kids with ADHD on stimulants do better at school and are better on cognitive tests, for example. I think on the medication side, the medications work. I think it's the mindset surrounding it, right? I feel like it can't hurt to understand better what's going on and what you're struggling with and how the medicine helps you. It's compensating for this deficit, or I'm not even sure it's a deficit because the protective mechanism against spending too much time in drudgery are
Right.
stronger in some than others. But if you're going to school and you don't like math and you have to do homework, then you need help, and it's fine. It's not cheating. It's not like an unfair advantage.
Yeah, it's not, it doesn't make you smarter. It just helps you be more awake and more motivated to do things
Yeah,
that you wouldn't
yeah.
particularly be interested in.
And you don't need it for your favorite thing. I'm probably sure you could go down to the line and ask people with ADHD, what's your favorite thing? And then go, do you need a stimulant to do that? And they'll all say no. And that could
Right.
be video games or hunting or racing dirt bikes. Like Albert Einstein probably, even if he had ADHD, wouldn't have needed stimulants because the thing he spent all his time on, he found fascinating naturally. And if he didn't need help with that, it probably would have helped him, I don't know, get more haircuts more frequently or do stuff he didn't like, do his taxes. I mean, I always felt that the ADHD was sort of a weird terminology given that people with that diagnosis often hyperfocused. One example I used before is, for my practice, I remember this one kid, I'm here in Missouri and out in the country, people go hunting. And so this dad comes in with a kid and he goes, I think he's faking ADHD at school. And I go, okay, why is that? Tell me. He's like, well, I took him hunting. It's deer season and he sat in a high stand without moving a muscle for many hours. He actually wanted to keep going when I was like, I'm cold, I want to go home. And then supposedly at school he can't sit still, especially in math, right? And I was like, what is that? And so with this view now that I have based on the study, it's like, well, apparently he loves hunting and
Yeah.
he does not like math.
Yeah.
And so the predicted reward of seeing a deer and shooting it, which isn't everybody's thing, but he seems to like it, keeps him in a spot and doing the thing. I'm sure every clinician's heard those stories before, like, like the kid who can't even stay in the classroom, but is like an ace dirt bike racer or something, which requires the super focus so you don't crash.
Clinically, what I've seen is um, parents think that ADHD is just such a misnomer, and they'll say, you know, thank you very much, Dr. Fallucco, but I don't think my child has ADHD because you should see him play video games. He can really lock in for
Yeah.
hours, and can persist with multiple distractions and still want to go after the next level and the next level.
Yeah.
And that's why this issue of reward and motivation is so key, because we know with ADHD that when you do have a lot of motivation and you're just inherently interested in it, whether it's deer hunting or Roblox, that you can lock in and focus. And the issue is it's harder to pay attention with things that you consider to be boring or drudgery. And unfortunately, sometimes those things may occur during school hours or in certain classes. And that makes it really hard for kids to be as successful in school and to, frankly, to just enjoy school. So,
Yeah, and I mean, video games are probably the one that comes up the most, I feel like, but it's a sort of globally trillion-dollar industry that is designed to hack into a young person's reward system, right? I mean, they're explicitly designed with a variable reward schedule to to to, to be rewarding, right? I mean, that's how they make money, and so it's not that surprising that, there's sort of one thing where often people will say, like, yeah, my kid can play video games all day, but not do homework. No, no, duh, right? I mean, this
it has
nobody
to,
designed homework to be addictive and super fascinating.
but maybe
But
they should. Oh my gosh, how
yeah,
cool would
yeah,
that be?
yeah.
And I
Other
think
things, sorry, like scrolling reels, right? Like TikTok and stuff. All these companies hired a bunch of academic psychologists who studied the reward system, and all of their algorithms reflect their understanding of how that works in the brain.
exactly the video game manufacturers and the social media brilliant geniuses know how to hack into the reward system, and they do it very effectively and get people drawn in and persisting for insane amounts of time.
Yeah.
But we don't have that same technology applied to elementary, middle, and high school education necessarily.
A lot of people have like non-prescription tricks that are similar to stimulants to get themselves to do things. Like you start talking to people like, before I do unpleasant task X, like before I do the laundry, I always have to have a piece of chocolate. It's not as strong, but there's like a mild dopaminergic effect. Or I eat some gummy bears, or I go for a run. You're doing the same thing, except mine's less healthy. It's chocolate, and yours is you go for a 3 mile run, and then you're like, now I can do my taxes.
So, like non-prescription tricks to treat
Yeah.
ADHD. It makes me think of this book, Atomic Habits, where they talk about exactly what you were describing, which is habit pairing something that you don't particularly like to do with something that is rewarding and fun, like chocolate or running or whatever it is, depending upon
Yeah.
you individually. That when you associate those two things with one another, then it gets you to do the thing you don't want to do. And which is exactly what we're saying stimulants are doing by pre-rewarding you, increasing your motivation and your drive to do something.
Yeah.
And it makes me think that we need to think more broadly for all of our kids with ADHD and family members with ADHD to try to figure out what is the most challenging thing for you to do during the day that is also important for functioning well. And then how can we zero in on that, either in therapy or in discussion with the families, to figure out a way to somehow habit pair or make that more rewarding naturally.
Absolutely. I used to see this in myself and some people in my family, for example, this procrastination thing. Where it's like, okay, I can't do X yet. Say taxes. It's coming up April 15th. Almost nobody likes taxes. And so it's, oh, I'm procrastinating because no, I'm going to do this fun thing. And then later in the day, I'm going to do my taxes. I used to beat myself up about that kind of behavior morally because it's like, why are you a procrastinator? That's bad. And now I realize, no, it's like my brain is like, you woke up and there's no predicted reward and your dopamine's low. But if you, I don't know, go to the pool with the kids, then you can do your taxes. Like you're not bad. Once you can understand it, you don't need to beat yourself up or like be mystified as much by your own behavior or by your kids or by your relatives or whatever, right?
I mean, it's how we're entirely wired. Like we're driven towards things that are rewarding, and we've been designed or wired in a way that the things that we need to do
Yeah.
for survival tend to be more rewarding.
Medicine, for example, a few years ago, I started noticing that the different medicine subspecialties had like different ADHD distributions. Like
Yes.
the ER and the ICU have much higher percentages, and it totally makes sense because you need this excitement and moving from spot to spot, but it also makes you much more tolerant of what other people consider stress. And then there's some subspecialties like PEDS ID. Every patient is a 4 hour visit, and the history is 20 pages long, and you need like a lot, and there's not that much sort of sudden excitement and beeping. I haven't yet to meet someone in that specialty that has ADHD.
Yeah. But you bring up a really good point here, which is one of the things that we can do as adults is to try to help destigmatize having ADHD, reframing it as It's not that you have any cognitive deficits or there's anything wrong with the way you think or how smart you are. I love how you put it. You said it's just your brain has a really big protective effect against drudgery and boredom. Your brain does not really like to be super bored. And that's not a bad thing. But if you're coming to me because you're failing school or having major problems, okay, well, we've got to get over that obstacle somehow so that we can get you on the path of doing the thing that you love and being successful. So these stimulants meds will increase your motivation and drive to do the kind of boring things at school, like whatever they are, and will keep you awake and paying attention so that you can get back to doing the things that you love.
My entire life I've gamified things I didn't like on purpose to make them more bearable. Nowadays, if you work at a university, you have a lot of online trainings that are common sense, and you have to do the same one every year.
The hurricane preparedness for Florida, like every year I have to answer questions about how many gallons per person per day of water do you need during hurricane season. Anyway, go on.
But the only way I can do it now is I remember my time from last year, and I essentially try to do it really fast. I was like, I bet I can do this in 9 minutes, because otherwise I don't even want to do it at all. But now I'm like, oh, look, I beat my time from last year. I did it in under 9 minutes. But now it's like at work or something, if it's like really nobody wants to do it, you like make it a game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can do it the fastest or the most, or who can get the high score.
As parents, as therapists, as psychiatrists, as family members, whoever, maybe part of our job is to try to help figure out ways to make things more rewarding, make things more fun, and even gamify them. And this works for everybody. Like I'm an adult who needs to do a lot of things that I don't want to do. And increasing my pre-reward, if that gets things done faster, that's not a bad thing. And then like maybe take some cues or pages from the playbook of the video game manufacturers and the social media gurus. Use the same reward system. I am so glad that I had this opportunity to talk with you. And it is such a treat for our listeners and for me to be able to learn about these incredible findings and to be part of the science of moving our understanding of stimulant medications forward. So thank you for your contributions and for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me.
And now for our listeners, I just want to recap high points and mainly talk about the clinical implications of this really groundbreaking study. And I want to borrow from one of the analogies that Dr. Dosenbach used. Now that we have a more powerful microscope, metaphorically, to look at the brain, we have a better understanding of how stimulants work in the brain. And with this better understanding, it can help us explain to patients and families how stimulants work. So while this study showed that stimulants do not work in the attention networks in the brain, we know that they're working in other parts and in other areas to improve performance and behavior. Put simply, stimulants work in the brain by helping us to feel more wide awake, aka increasing arousal, and also by increasing dopamine and tapping into our motivational systems to give us more drive, to increase our experience of predicted reward, or to help make things that previously would have been boring seem like they're more fun. And that in turn helps us become more engaged and helps us be able to lock in and do what we need to do to be at our best. So while the stimulants are not directly working on the attention networks of the brain, we now know that they're helping us feel more awake and more motivated, which in turn translates into improved performance and oftentimes improved behavior because you're not feeling as bored. And I just want to thank you all for joining us on this new bench to bedside type episode and series of the pod. If you enjoyed this, I really hope you'll share it with a friend or colleague. And as always, feel free to click our link in the show notes to our website, psyched4peds.com, to join our newsletter or to send in any questions or ideas you have for future episodes. Thanks so much for tuning in. Look forward to talking to you next time.